So that's the first one that popped up, but there's so many more out there that connects with a place and time.
Listen to the lyrics of that song. That's a really dirty song. You ever listen to it?
Yes.
Yes. I don't no. That is what you quoted earlier. We don't listen to the lyrics, right?
We don't have.
That's all I listen to often is the lyrics. From when I was young, I learned lyrics to songs, and all of a sudden the words would pop in my head, and that's all I, and
they'll come out like in conversation or
too often.
but in that's another one of the subsystems that and there is we talk about this in therapy. Like if I'm talking with someone and a lyric comes into my mind, it often helps me to understand what's going on in this moment that I otherwise couldn't know.
Okay.
Like I remember I was I've used this example 1,000 times, but I was grading papers or tests, whatever, out in front of this was before Davidson Schuster building was built, and I'm doing, and suddenly there are people around me, and the Elvis Costello lyric, there's a song called "This Is Hell," "This is hell, this is hell, hell is heaven in reverse," and why is that song in my head? And then I realized, wait a minute, these people are really annoying me. I really am. All this time I've been exerting all this energy, and people are like, this is hell. You know,
that's where I'm at. All right, so.
I need to do something about that. One of the lyrics in that is, "My favorite things plays again and again, but it's by Julie Andrews and not by John Coltrane."
There you go.
Yeah. You may not be able to control some of those lyrics that pop in your head. That kind of things. Well, man, this has been cool today to talk about music and hear your own experiences, and we get to share some things about it. What's the final word on music? Is there anything we can do from a mental health side? Is it comforting? Can I go listen to that song when I'm down, or how do I do? You should engage
as many activities as you can that'll help introduce you to yourself. That'll help you to integrate parts of yourself that can generate that complexity we talk about. You don't have to think about it intellectually. We've talked about music in a way that could preclude the possibility of some folks just enjoying it. It's enough to just do that.
Right,
but,
right. Without a big purpose. You started out by asking the question, what is the purpose of music? So do you have an answer now that we've talked about
I like the idea that there's this notion by Schopenhauer, and he said that all great art must be useless. And there's also a lyric by Elvis Costello, what shall we do with all this useless beauty? Well, it needs to be useless because utility is only such a small fraction of what's asked of us in the world. If our job is to dig ditches, then it's certainly important that we dig the ditches we need to. But the rest of life is something else other than that. And I think art, beauty, all of it should be wonderfully useless. So it has utility. That's certainly important.
Okay.
But its utility is in its uselessness, I think. So.
Okay. All right. Rather profound in a way. Yeah. Play with and use all the crayons in the crayon box.
There you go.
I think we talked about. Jeff, good to have you here today.
Thank
man.
you.
Thank you for being here. All right. With that, I guess we'll stop there. We'll see you next time.
A story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
You did a great job the other day on ad-libbing on the street videos. Dr. Long,
appreciate that.
Dr. Long shot me an email, and the title of the email was Street Videos. And he was, yeah. So I thought, we're in trouble now.
No,
but,
street videos.
But street video.
Can I plug that in there?
As long as I can have street tacos in there somewhere.
You got a plug there? Try it. If it is, you got a plug.
This man. See, this is what I've learned. I've learned that I can't take him anywhere.
All right, there you go.
I've learned that for sure.
He's trying to. He's already sent like 12 Instagrams and 42 tweets out. You know what's up?
Unfortunately,
Go ahead, because you don't want to hear what I gotta say.
unfortunately, Dr. B, you know, we put out tons of great quality work,
All right.
and the thing is, they see it.
Okay.
They might not click on it, but they see it. So make sure I'm putting it in, an available space for them to see it. So
In their own time, because we understand people come to their, their own lights and understands in their own time and space. So, it'll be out there. You can take your time and go do what you gotta do.
Well, I'm just glad to have you guys in the studio. That's all I.
But Santi is the man, Dr. B. I just want to let y'all know Santi is the man.
Santi, you were talking those street videos, and Dr. Long sent me he liked them, by the way. He really thought it was kind of cool ad lib about it. You guys were just.
I was reading off
You were
the teleprompter.
freestyling. No, you were not. You were out there, man, and
The words were just,
I mean, the word came in. Somebody said the word alien, and then it was like, hey, you. Alien hunters, you need to have a podcast. I like it. You
gotta grab the attention.
That was very cool, very smooth, and I think that's an example too of just being yourself and being in the moment, and responding with that authenticity we were talking about a moment ago, and having fun at the same time. Now you can't have fun all the time because that doesn't necessarily make money. And move the part A down to part B. But
go back to your last point real quick. As far as one thing we've learned, and to what you just pointed on, being yourself. That's one of the main things that we've learned throughout working with everyone we work with is we had to stay true to who we were, regardless of what happened.
Makes sense.
We were put in a lot of different scenarios and situations and places where you're often given a choice. Do you be you, or do you switch it up? And we've, since day one, we've stayed true to ourselves. Comes with the good and the bad, but overall we like
comes with the bad.
Let's say sometimes it comes with the bad.
Not everybody's going to be a fan, right? I mean, you better.
There are a lot of non-fans.
Right. What you said.
All right, that's what he said. All right, so but I'm thinking you're right about that. But that that's part of life, and sort of moving through those moments. That it's not all about your hurt feelings, or it's not all about some thought you have in your head all the time. You got to kind of move on and get over that, and not be so self-critical, or not have your ego so fragile.
Egos are out there. If you want to be, I don't want to say, you got to, in order to be successful, you got to remove your ego, because there's a lot of successful egotistic people.
Oh yeah.
But
these days and times,
like he said, with these relationships nowadays, with the way the society is if you can just maneuver better, is that me?
I think that is.
If you can just maneuver better with people, aka, like you said, sometimes don't always think about yourself. Don't put you in front of everything. Things will work better, because if everyone is thinking about everyone else, then everyone is taken care of. It's that simple. Because if you're just only thinking about yourself and you can't care for another person, like no one else can be cared of than just you.
It's much more important what happens the day after the revolution than the day of. And in some ways that is reflective of what happens in therapy too. When someone comes in and we initiate some sort of change process, there's some sort of movement, some sort of understanding, some sort of skill imparted. It's really the most important thing is what happens next. And I think that's sort of the subtext in all this, and even the paper I want to write. I want to think about what happens next, and how do we ensure that what happens next can be somehow a fidelity or somehow connected in the best possible way to what happened the day before.
All right. I like it. It's food for thought. And I don't think we always think that long term necessarily. And maybe we need to. All right, good conversation, Dan. I guess that's it. That's
Boom.
a wrap. We'll see you next time.
Uma Thurman. She's doing that. She's the little girl with the climate change. Uma Thurman.
No, that's
No.
So the transits that are still interesting to us here in 2019 are the ones that are taking place in other solar systems.
okay.
Now, wait a minute. That
Yes.
implies something, right?
Yes, it does.
That implies that there are actually planets around other stars. And in fact, the very way we discovered planets around other stars had to do with the way that the planets were orbiting around those parent stars.
Right.
And so there's a whole new class of planets that we know a lot about now.
Yes.
That are called extrasolar planets.
Extrasolar planet.
Extrasolar. Extrasolar means they're not orbiting our sun, they're orbiting another star.
All right.
We now know of over 4,000 extrasolar planets.
Wait a minute. 4,000.
Over 4,000. And by
Over
the way, that
4,000.
number keeps going up, so it's a little bit hard for me to keep track. I think the latest number I saw was 4,084 known confirmed exoplanets or extrasolar planets.
Incredible.
And so by the way, let me throw that shortening in.
Yes.
You'll see the word exoplanet.
Right.
And exoplanet is just because guys like myself got tired of saying extrasolar planet. It was just too many syllables.
Yeah.
So we just cut it down to exoplanet.
Shorten it up. Make it quick. And we're
you go.
moving on. Okay, I got it.
In with a cool crowd. So if you're in with a cool crowd, you'll call them exoplanets. So when you hear the term exoplanet, just think about a planet around a star that's not the sun. It's around another one of those stars that we see up in the sky.
First of all, that's just amazing that we have that technology
Right.
and yeah, it's sort of brilliant scientific thinking to figure this out. I think,
and
in
that's
so
what
many
I'd like
ways.
to address a little bit. How did we find these things, right?
Yeah.
There's two ways that we found exoplanets. And actually the first way is a little bit more complicated. It's a pretty specialized circumstance.
Okay.
That's when a very big, massive planet is orbiting a fairly small star at a fairly close range.
Right.
When that's happening, scientists can actually detect the star moving in and out relative to the Earth. But really what it's doing, it's kind of going around in a circle. Now, we don't see that other planet, but we can see the star moving in a circle. Well, that implies that there has to be another planet out there tugging it and making it move. The
Okay.
planet does not give off light, so it's not bright enough
that's
for us
right.
to see.
Yes, I remember you saying, "Hey, it's all about light."
Right.
That's how we
Astronomy's
get to see
prejudiced to
things.
things that glow in the dark. So that's why we have to watch those things that glow in the dark, right? So the star itself, though, is glowing nicely, and we can see that star moving around in its own little circle because of a common orbit with a very heavy planet. But to us, what we're measuring is the radial movement in and out. And we do that with this thing called Doppler shifts or red shift, blue shift. And so that's the wavelengths of light being shifted relative to because of the motion of that star. So one of the ways we can figure out that there are planets around other stars is we can just see that we can see that parent star vibrating in and out a little bit, which really means it's going around in tiny circles.
Got it. Yeah.
But there are
Okay,
only
that's
a
cool.
very special few star-planet combinations that are just right for us to detect that kind of radial motion.
Well, and it's at such a distance too. And
Exactly.
it's still mind-boggling, and for me, anyway, that we can take those tiny little shifts and things, and then extrapolate that's an orbit.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty
Exactly.
cool idea.
But so astronomers came up with then a second way to potentially identify planets that were orbiting other stars. And this still is kind of a Goldilocks situation where everything has to be lined up just right.
Got it.
It's just that it is a more common occurrence, which is something called a transiting exoplanet. So we've talked about transits.
Okay.
Transits in our own solar system or a planet moving in front of the face of a sun. Well, a transiting exoplanet is another solar system out in our galaxy where the planet's planes of orbit are lined up just right to where the planet will pass in front of the face of its parent star.
Okay.
And when it does that, it dims the light from that parent star down a little bit.
Okay.
And then as it moves off the face of its parent star, the light comes back up again. So it's just passing between us. It's not actually touching the star, but
Right.
it's passing in between us and that star. It drops the light coming to Earth down a little bit as it moves in front, and then as it moves out of the way, the light comes back up again. So
Right.
so scientists developed a whole series of cameras that were very sensitive to picking up these slight variations in the light coming from stars due to planets passing in front of them. And they mounted some of those cameras on a couple of spacecraft. The first spacecraft to go into orbit around the Earth that had this technology on it was called Kepler.
Wow.
And so Kepler was a telescope named after Johannes Kepler, who studied planetary motions, by the way. So Kepler was a
You have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
All right, Dan. Good to see you.
Saturday
What is going on? Yes, Saturday
I am
morning.
not bathed.
of course, I hear.
Not
So-
bathed. This is the hat. As I
Yes.
mentioned earlier, I smell like deviled ham. Whenever I don't bathe for a while, I smell like a potted meat.
Oh my goodness.
So,
okay, potted meat.
I
Yes,
have not
there's a
eaten.
topic
I haven't
for
bathed
us
in a
right
couple
there.
of 4th of July and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah, we just had the 4th of July. Did you see the fireworks? Or there?
I was in Atlanta.
Celebration?
I was on top of this building and I saw fireworks from they were all, many of them were far away, but I could see them from a surround. Centennial Park, Decatur, Buckhead, all these sorts of places. Boom, they were all going on around you. It's amazing.
Oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I like that idea.
For a brief moment, I felt okay to be alive. Just for
Okay,
a small,
just for a small,
just a small
brief
moment. I was,
You know, I think we need to work on expanding that for
We could.
you, particularly,
We could,
so
yeah.
you can enjoy this ride.
you know what else I have found that helps me to enjoy life is this wonderful new refreshing beverage, Supercharged.
Supercharged.
There you
Okay. Okay. I'll just leave it right there. Thank you. I appreciate that mention there. I'm sure the guys upstairs appreciate that as well. So, so what's been on your So what's been on your mind? So that could break into a commercial and it would go south in a hurry. We all know that. Everyone watching this absolutely knows that. So
I could do commercials. Let's see. What I was thinking was a couple of things. You brought something up, but I also had something on the drive up to. It's a family tradition that we listen to David Sedaris audiobooks.
okay.
That's what we For a while there was we were listening to Ayn Rand audiobooks.
Oh no,
but
that was not happening.
But yeah,
that didn't happen. But
suddenly I found at one point my son, he was 10 at the time. I found him attempting to club a poor person to death.
Okay.
And that's when I realized we needed to.
We might need to pay attention a little bit more.
We need to stop the Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
So, but we. So we've been
people can put those two together later. All right, there we go.
We've been listening to like some David Sedaris, and which is interesting because sometimes some of what he talks about is not kid friendly. So you have to hover near the pause button to be able to move through some things because he does this one story about Fire Island that not for kids.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So, but it's funny. It's just not for kids.
Yeah, right.
So we're up there. We're
part
heading
of your
toward.
job, right? As a parent,
yeah. But I thought part of my job actually is to guide him through tactical shaming.
Yeah, we talked about your parental shaming earlier.
That's right. I'm going to write a book on shame-based parenting.
There's a need for an intervention on that for sure.
There is. It probably is. So we're in the car. We're going up, and suddenly Sedaris tells a story. His stories are autobiographical, and I'm sure there's a little liberty taken in this one. But it talks about when he was younger, somewhere around the age between 6. Well, actually, he makes it sound like it started somewhere around that time, when he had these severe obsessive compulsive symptoms. Like he would be in the classroom, he would get up 28 times during classroom, and he would go and have to lick the light switch. On the way home, he would have to lick mailboxes, statues in people's yards. He would have to lick the doorknob to his house. He would have to kiss the stairs. All these sort of things, and he would. So a 10-minute walk would be an hour and a half, and it was just sort of riddled and weighed with all these rituals that you have to go through.
It seems very interesting too, because with the tongue, he has to lick things. That's germs and everything. That's got to drive somebody crazy in his household, I'm sure.
Well, the teacher was rather upset. It began with the teacher sort of wanting sending a letter home to his mom to address these things.
Okay.
And the teacher, at least from his perspective, wasn't quite understanding what this all could mean. She thought it was just simply sort of she didn't.
Very bizarre in some ways, and that's why you're not going to come to a quick understanding of that until you look at it a little bit.
And you might want to, most of the classroom you'd want to touch things with the glove. When that kid's around.
Right, everyone wears gloves now.
But and he tells a story. Oddly enough, he makes it relatively humorous. But if you've ever been subject to obsessive compulsive symptoms or known someone who has, they are terrifying, and they're hell. They just really are. They're tough. And to be plagued by
it's kind of associated. It's anxiety, right? It falls into that camp. And look at anxiety, depression, illness, those kinds of things, for sure.
And that's where it becomes sort of interesting because. If you look at it from a purely biological stance, we could say that maybe it is something awry with the nervous system. We could say that, and certainly in very extreme cases, that there seems to be some genetic pull. There's history of severe obsessive disorder in families often. But one way to think about it would be, because I tend to, I don't know if you know this, but I can look at things psychoanalytically.
Sure.
Sometimes, every once in a while.
Every once in a while,
every day. So we can think about it. If at the core it is anxiety, obsessive compulsive symptoms are an attempt at a solution. It is what Freud called making the best of a bad job. Everything that was all of these obsessive acts, these obsessive thoughts and compulsive acts, are all circle around a central and core anxiety, and that they are attempts to mediate that. They're attempts to be able to do something with it. And if you, for instance, he makes just a passing mention of what was going on at a time when these things really became difficult. His parents had just moved from the north to North Carolina, and they were living in this temporary house. And so you can see that at that moment he was placed under a tremendous amount of pressure and stress.
Okay.
And as a kid, whatever tendency he had toward compulsive activity and obsessive thought suddenly became increasingly exacerbated as a result of this change. And so the solution became even more drastic and dire. And as you can see, that developmentally there are all these sorts of, particularly as we move into middle school, social pressures, puberty. They're both internal and external stressors that occur as a result of your developmental arc, and they tend to increase. And so
yeah, and that I was interested in his age at the time. You didn't mention that, but I'm assuming it was middle school.
I think so. I think he said he was. I think he was 10 or 11. I may be wrong. But it seemed to be somewhere around that area, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, something like that.
It was developmental.
Yeah, he was right there in that sort of spot.
Okay.
And so you can see that it's an attempt to be able to cope, and it's what makes it sort of like most symptoms. And this is the way to sort of think about this. This is the way, particularly psychoanalytically, we would define a symptom. It provides an immediate and limited but very effective solution to the anxiety at hand. But long term, it tends to feed itself. So it's a symptom that begins to actually reinforce itself and make itself worse. Because if his anxiety on some level was feeling alone and vulnerable, moving away from friends and family and a network of connections that somehow made him feel supported, as soon as he comes to a new place, licking doorknobs and light switches is not going to make you connected to people.
No, as a matter of fact, it's going to run people in the opposite direction, or he's going to suffer some real consequences from other people.
And the vicious spiral of that is, boom, it begins to get worse and worse and worse. And so the problem you fix now requires more of the same fix, and then at some point it can even unmoor itself and no longer be tied at all to the thing that initially started.
Okay. That's
so in his case, it seemed to, if his story is accurate, it was remarkably debilitating. And for him, it wasn't until he had maybe a bit more control over it. It wasn't until he started smoking as a young adult and doing drugs that he was able to do something with those things. He would talk about how the ritual of smoking, lighting a cigarette, of stepping away to smoke, all these sorts of things were a way for him to suddenly, once he picked up chain smoking, to develop a set of compulsions and rituals that were more socially acceptable. And so we made that trend. Now, why his parents didn't take him to a therapist, I don't know. That in of itself this was in the 70s, I guess.
Excuse me.
Late 60s, early 70s, I guess. Something you all do one.
Right. Might be
but
some kind of taboo against that.
But that also could be diagnostic, that the family, it's simply just, so I don't know. And if you've listened to any of his stories, he's lots going on.
Yeah, it seems like there is a lot going on with him, but he's prolific and he's on NPR and he's on all of these. I guess there's shows in some regard, so
he
seems to be doing pretty well and pulled his act together, at least literally.
He doesn't have his own drink yet, but he's not quite at that level of success, but he's moving in that direction.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So it took a sort of a life of its own, moved away from the initial starting point for him with the anxiety and the move and the other kinds of things there. So.
And part of what makes this interesting is that if you think about this psychodynamically, all of us come up with a solution for the things that we feel and the stressors we have. It's just some of us are lucky enough, either through genetic pull or having the right sort of developmental environment, we come up with much better solutions than the ones he came up with. all of us have a way of, we have at least some modicum of maybe obsessive or compulsive things that move through us. But for instance, there's a hierarchy of ego defenses that are talked about in the psychodynamic literature. And one of the ones he exhibits is a good one to have, a sense of humor. So if you are experiencing that initial anxiety that anybody would feel in a social setting, but you're able to tell a joke, that's a sort of defense that mediates your affect, but in such a way that brings people closer. So it's certainly true that humor can go off the rails and can end up running people away. I think my wife probably could talk about that.
I was going to say, we probably have plenty of examples just from this show.
That's
not
right.
only at your home, but
the fact that certain things she says you should not find funny, and I can't help it. It's just,
that's an immediate signal for you to find something.
That's right. But by and large, it's a much better defense than the compulsive licking of a light switch.
Sure.
But all of us have a pattern of symptoms, adaptive or otherwise, that we make use of. And they become something that's often referred to as character structure. They become, it's reflex, it's like an autopilot, it's like an implicit map of our insides and our outsides that we sort of follow. And built into that are these solutions we come up with, these ways, and they are embedded. They're not something we're often aware of. They mediate automatically and reflexively. And part of what happens in therapy, if our man Dave Sedaris were to, as a kid, show up, part of the goal would be is to help him to name and to acknowledge at least some of the anxiety he's experiencing. If you created a space, if he were a younger child and you did play therapy, for instance, you could find a way for him to be able to put into words in some form of mediated action the sort of stressors that the move made. Since he's a little older at the time, you might get him to be able to tell you directly, or in the stories he speaks of. If you ask him what he's been doing and starts telling you about a TV show he likes, sometimes those are small windows into talking about characters that he identifies with. And it becomes some small movement for him to begin to put into words instead of these reflexive actions, the things he's attempting to mediate. And you create what's known as an environment of dyadic regulation, as opposed to the solitary. There's dyadic regulation and there's solitary regulation. That's not what it is. But there's a fancy term for it. But
okay. Got it.
When he is in these obsessive compulsive symptoms, he is stuck outside of the potential for dyadic regulation. The story begins with the teacher sort of making fun of him and sending a letter home. Right. The story begins with a failure of potential dyadic regulation. If she had sat down with him, and it may not have been helpful for her to say, why do you keep doing this?
Right.
But she could have sat down with him and said, hey man, I know you're new here. When did you guys move down? She could have started there.
Okay.
That would be the moment of potential dyadic regulation. If that were successful in a successful treatment, part of what happens, including maybe helping him to sort of name some skills he could utilize, giving him some tools to navigate these things, but he also would be able to internalize. He would bring the teacher with him. In the act of dyadic regulation, you sort of internalize that sort of stuff, and it becomes a new map, a new reflex, more adaptable. That makes some sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense because the idea that we all are on this continuum a little bit with this OCD, the obsessive compulsive kind of thing, and that we build some kind of structure as we go along. But for him, it was an extreme. I mean, licking all these objects around in this world must have just horrified all the people close to him. And look for a significant reason for this in some way.
And you can see that it leaves him increasingly isolated and away from the potential for the level of dyadic regulation that he needs. And probably his family is also under a great deal of stress. I think at the time his mom was pregnant with his brother, I think. So there were always familial pressures. So, and I think he had at that time 2 older sisters. I think he has 3. Maybe he has 3 older sisters.
Wow.
Maybe, I think that's right. And, or maybe a younger sister. I think he has a younger sister too, or maybe I'm wrong. But, so there was nothing there, or there was minimal things there to help him to be able to cope outside of that reflexive symptom.
Yeah, I'm wondering too. I mean, it seems like it was unconscious. He wasn't going in and saying, "Oh, when I get to North Carolina, I'm going to start licking the light switch." This was something that just manifested itself. What's the explanation? I mean, why couldn't he realize? Wait a minute, and think through this in some way, kind of self-regulate. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because if you go with, when I've worked with patients with OCD, oftentimes with them, there's something dangerous about thinking it. There's something dangerous about getting close to it. There's an example that I can't remember the name of the text, but with a woman who had her husband had taken a job, and she had just moved into a new city, southern city, middle of nowhere, small town, and she began to, they moved, and she had just had her second child. She had a 2-year-old, and she had a baby. And when she was leaving the house, if she were leaving the house with a sitter or by herself, especially by herself with the kids or whatever, she would have to check the stove 500 times. She had to go back and forth, and she would have to do the locks almost 100 times. She just would, and she'd always had some compulsive trends, but they really become incredibly exacerbated. Well, part of a way to think about this, what she may need to think to move past that, if we take a psychodynamic step, is to think about the anger she may have toward her husband, the anger she may have toward her kids. There may be an unconscious desire for the stove to actually burn the house down because she might want to be free of all the pain and struggle and stress that she's under.
Right.
So there's a knot. There is a conflict between different parts of herself that find themselves tied to this symptom. And to untie the knot, you may have to get connected to things that are very difficult to think. Maybe even things that are impossible to think. For Sideris as a little boy, he may not have the capacity to be able to think these things. He's never, if he had lived in his hometown up until he was 10 years old, he doesn't have the words to know what moving means. Someone may at some point may have attempted to, so I think that's part of it. So sometimes the feelings are too much, but sometimes there's a conflict too. There is, and this is very psychoanalytic and maybe controversial in a number of quarters, but at least with some obsessive symptoms, there's a danger to really peering under the symptom, because what you find there can be maybe very dangerous and difficult. No one wants to think that they want to burn their family down.
Right.
But
you're having those kind of very horrible, unthinkable kinds of thoughts, and being able to confront those, and that's hard enough for anyone to do.
A number of folks that I've worked with throughout the ages, I'm not that old. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But throughout my career as a male hand model, throughout my career as a therapist.
What is it that you do? We gotta figure that out one day.
Yeah, what do I do?
That's another show. We'll get to that.
But oftentimes, some of the symptoms, the patterns you see will be around things like pedophilia. Oh, I think I'm a child molester. I think I'm a horrible person. And that they can, they'll can't drive past the park because there'll be kids there, and they'll suddenly, oh my God, what a horrible person. And sometimes the symptoms serve the purpose of, or at least part of their purpose, is to punish. That the things that I feel are too much, and to project condemnation and aggression outward are a way to tie that knot. They offer a quick and not so easy, very difficult solution. Part of the work is to get someone to be able to, if not directly peer under what conflict may be arriving at that, getting them better at being able to feel the things that they feel.
Right.
I can think of an individual who had some those fears of pedophilia, and he had graduated from a graduate program and had just started a fairly lucrative career and was beginning to experience some success when his obsessive compulsive symptoms began to reach a crescendo. Mm-hmm. And part of the work with him was untying this knot to see that at least part of this had to do with the fact that he was now more successful than his dad. Mm-hmm. That up until now he had lived under this idea that his dad was as good as it could get, was second to God in terms of his place in the universe, and to suddenly live in a world where he began to think about his father differently. His very success began to wreck the balance in the world that he had. And so beginning to get him to touch on those things began to get him to be, and it's difficult to see, well, how does fear of molesting kids connect with this wrecked by success narrative? But what is central to it is really just affect. It is feeling. Symptoms are an attempt to be able to mediate inner experience, and that can tie all sorts of things together that often seem not connected at all. Right. Or it could be that it was necessary for me to do that because he had good insurance and I wanted a boat.
Okay, this was we were straightforward there. We just went off the rails just a little bit about the boat, but
I really don't.
It's difficult to face these kinds of things, and if the context of the family we're in and the environment that we're in makes it harder to do that, sure, we're going to shy away from that. We're going to find reasons not to look at that. And as you said, it may be too horrifying for the person.
It's it ain't easy being human, and that's part of the takeaway from this is that you can look at someone with the extreme symptoms that Sedaris had with the licking of the light switch, but we can see embedded in that something existential, something that is central to the human condition. We have to come up with a solution that allows us to live, and we are not solitary in that. We don't do it by ourselves. It requires people in our life to help us to do that. And no matter how good they are, sometimes they're not good enough in some ways. We have genetics and biology give us a certain, there are certain factors there that we're like cards we were dealt. All of those things sort of swirl together, and we come up with a way to do something with those. And when you look at an extreme situation like Sedaris, think about yourself. You think about the things that you do. Think about the way in which you mediate stress. One of the more common ways would be, lots of folks, the first thing they do when they come home is either on the weekend or usually the weekend they'll Netflix binge. Right. And you may say to yourself, on one level, that's okay, Netflix binge, but that can be.
By the way, it happened at my house this couple of days ago with the third season of Stranger Things.
Stranger Things, yes. So. That's
sorry, I didn't mean to take you off.
Yeah, I got to watch that Stranger Things. That's that one about it's got Ducky in it.
I'm not going to say anything. I tried to talk about it the other day. I was shushed at the house because we didn't want to reveal anything.
Okay.
Try to be respectful.
A Netflix binge can be symptomatic because it can be another solution to mediate certain affect states. We talked before about that notion of the euthymic window. We can move to a place of compulsive activity in the Netflix binge, and it's different than licking a light switch, but it can in the end keep us maybe even stuck in some ways that Sedaris also was. A weekend spent Netflix binging doesn't allow you to think about the week before, the Monday through Friday, that generated the need for that compulsive activity. And it is possible, if you are allowed to get close enough to things that pushed you toward that symptom, to suffer just enough to feel them, you might be able to come up with a more adaptive solution. You may be liberated. You may grow in a way that allows you to have more of a life than a life that you have to attempt to escape from through a screen.
Right. Well, I guess we have to use what we have at hand in some ways. So what happens if you don't adapt to this? I mean, you were talking about, I mean, he obviously kind of pushed through this and worked through it in some ways.
He made a lot of dough. The Sedaris guy, he's successful.
What happens when you don't have the opportunity to work through? That sounds like a terrible place to be in your life, and it would constrain you from ever kind of growing.
I think there are folks who are literally debilitated, who are trapped. There used to be a saying in shrink circles that if you scratch the surface of an obsessive, you get a psychotic. And what that really means is that untempered, and what often happens is, as part of our developmental arc, is a lot of emotionally difficult or a lot of psychological symptoms can have some level of remission as one moves through age. They can sometimes, and so it could be that folks who initially have these sorts of things, they may even out. They may find a way that they may disperse. You'll notice lots of pre and adolescent and post-adolescents will develop certain tics. Those will come and go, and those may be connected with the rapid myelinization of different hemispheres, which can be connected with increased executive functioning control, all that sort of stuff. So there are neurological sort of hallmarks and markers one move through, but some folks these things don't remit, and instead they find themselves trapped forever. They do.
It sounds like a pretty rough place to be for a lot of folks. Well, I was told at one point that being a little bit OCD was good while you were in graduate school, and you're working on advanced studies. So
I was told a little psychopathy was good.
Okay.
Until they found the bodies, and then they were like, "Look, man,
you gotta stop this if you're gonna graduate." Okay, I heard that. Yeah.
But within Western culture, especially, OCD, a little bit of that is good. We sort of have to, in some ways, differentiate between OCD and OCPD. Depending on who you're talking to, those can be radically different things. But if the capacity to develop and maintain structure certainly is within Western society very important. OCPD, the more central thing is control. That also, a little bit of that can be important. You have the capacity to be able to direct and mediate and control over the things that you feel and things that you do. So, would come in handy. That said, though, I'm sure you can think of folks that you may have attended graduate school with or professors, for instance, who did that, and then
students in there.
Students, yeah, you probably know.
Let's cover everybody.
Don't.
As we can.
Yeah, I've had bosses and administrators.
Everyone up the line.
There are lots of ways
Yeah.
where you are, there used to be when you were a kid, I haven't heard my son say this, but when I was growing up, you would say, step on a crack and break your mother's back.
Yeah.
And this saying goes all the way back to Freud. Freud writes about it, and it's called the Thalian principle.
Okay.
I think I may be mispronouncing that. It's the idea that, for Freud, it's there is an excessive enjoyment about dancing around cracks that could potentially kill your mom. And that's in some ways the essence of a symptom. To lick a light switch doesn't just mediate inner tension, it brings with it its own sense of enjoyment. A guy by the name Jacques Lacan, again, not Shaka Khan, very different people.
I know.
Use that.
The albums are different. The music is completely different.
Very different. You can dance to both of them, though. But he called it jouissance, and it's the idea that there is an excessive pleasure to these things. So part of what also drives a symptom is if you're just walking along and trying not to step on cracks, but if suddenly in your mind you fantasize, if I step on this crack, I'll kill my mom. Suddenly it becomes a game. It begins to have there's a charge to it.
Right.
And so Lacan, he wants to emphasize that there is an enjoyment, an excessive enjoyment in our symptoms. They allow us to, there is something there, a sort of obscene pleasure that drives these things too. And then part of untangling is being able to do something with that as well.
Right, there's a lot to manage in these situations for folks going through this, but a little bit goes a long way, as they say. So maybe we'll figure out what you need to do in therapy. But I think you said it earlier that we need to approach these issues in some ways that without the blame necessarily. Because I think your example a few minutes ago was like the teacher coming at the person and saying, what's wrong with you, as opposed to talk about what the situation was like moving to North Carolina.
Well, that does in some ways go against my shame-based parenting techniques.
Parenting. I hope you don't use that in therapy. Do you use it? No. I would take that question back.
Shame-based therapy. It would be, you lousy light switch looker. That's not really going to help. That's not.
No, that's not going to help. And as well,
well, it's interesting because it actually can. Well, shame doesn't help. But one of the things that we talk about in one of my favorite kids, Willie B. on there, says that our first role as therapists are to survive the patient. And I would say that our first role of any social encounter is to survive the other. And so someone who is licking your light switch is a harder person to survive. Someone who is in front of you, rocking back and forth, crying hysterically, saying they're a child molester because they had these thoughts, is hard to survive. So part of what, to be able to lean in, to be able to mentalize the person across from you, is to be able to, as best you can, see the humanity, and if you can, also see where your own symptoms may lie, that you are at least part of that continuum. I may not be someone who licks light switch, but I am someone who does this and this and this and this.
Right.
So.
Wow. There's a lot to think about there.
And hopefully the thinking involves someone with really good insurance, because I got a boat.
Yeah, you're boat.
No, I got to get a boat. Right now, I couldn't afford a dinghy.
Right. How about a float for the pool that we've heard about?
Yeah, like those floaties. Yeah, I couldn't even afford floaties.
No floaties.
Floaties.
It's terrible. It's a terrible situation. Well, we'll take donations at the end of the show. Pitch in for some floaties for you.
I thought we should work in commercials, like the guys upstairs. We'll do a commercial for them.
Let's leave the guys upstairs out of this conversation until we bonded our friendship. Okay, then we can move.
That's actually a referral to not God, but as people don't realize, we are polytheists. So we believe in many gods. So that's reference right to the gods who are guiding us, and Zeus and Apollo and
others,
and Ed Norton. I don't know.
Or the tweet of God, I think, is out there on Twitter. So
what is it now? The tweet of God?
Yeah. That's God tweets now.
God tweets. I hope
some situations, but they can't shut him down for some reason.
I hope he's not tweeting anything from Leviticus. Wear mixed fabrics. I'm gonna send you to hell.
Those things I wish I hadn't brought up at this moment, but that's what we do sometimes. So what do you know? All right, man. Well, that's been very interesting. Mm-hmm. So, what else?
Well, you're not supposed to have. Is this like radio? You can't have dead air.
We can have dead air. Yeah.
Some people would say
It's called post-production.
Here it is.
So we
Here it is.
just find that moment where we can stop to get to the next
I think there are
one.
only two kinds of air in this room: hot air and dead air. I think there's really you got no.
Which is more? I don't know.
Well, you brought us up a little earlier, and in some ways, there's a way to connect these
Yeah. Well,
about ideology. And what
I
people.
certainly want to talk about it.
So we can say that for later if you want.
Yeah, well, we need to have a longer time to kind of get into it, but let's talk about it for just a second.
Well,
Set this up, sort of a.
When you talked about this notion of
precursor.
ideology, like why are people like, we should remain apolitical, or do we wade into the fray?
Well, I would say at this point there's no way escaping from the politics because it's in the air that we breathe at this point. So
Well, I have a couple
be careful we don't go.
of friends from Tennessee where I grew up. We're very conservative. And so they often send on the Facebooks. I don't know if you got one of those Facebooks, or if you know anybody that does.
I've heard of the Facebooks.
But I got one of the Facebooks, and they send these, and they often say things like, immigrants go home. I don't like line breakers, or that was one they go about breaking in line, there are pictures of Trump as if he was drawn a little like he might be some sort of Christ figure.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an ideological component to that.
Sure.
And you were saying that why do people cling to that? Why do people
that's
sort of
kind
stay?
of the question. Why do we need that? In other words, we can't really sort of independently think about things as they come and make choices in that. We have to sort of join a particular ideology and then march to that tune.
Right.
And I find that very interesting.
This is how this connects, because we'll go with Lacan again. Lacan has a famous saying that reality is structured like fiction.
Okay.
And only the non-duped err. That's another one.
Okay.
And
we may have to have some disclaimer at the end of this show, but and also a definition, some terms used during this show.
But what he means by that is that the only way you can be wrong is not to be fooled. And what that means is that we can only exist or make use of reality through some sort of mesh, through symptom, through our own histories. It is always to some degree wrong. So there is a fiction that we create to be able to, that involves us and the people around us, and this fiction is how we move through the world. And it is always to some degree untrue, because it has to be. It is always to some degree unfinished. And what happens with rigid ideological structures is they become rigid, fascistic, and they no longer allow for the movement that what one needs to have with our necessary fiction. You could imagine a dialectic of illusion and disillusionment, and illusion and disillusionment that allows the growth of a mind and a spirit to be able to get bigger and bigger and embrace the world in a better and better fashion. But on some level, we have to cling. When we talk about learning theory, for instance, that there's also a famous philosopher that said, all learning is, there is no learning without suffering. And that's the whole notion of assimilation versus accommodation from P. James' standpoint. That to assimilate is not to alter the fiction and the illusion we live with. To accommodate it, however, is to have to alter that, and that is almost always painful. So, and I'm picking on my friends in Tennessee, but for instance, this notion that, immigrants go home, nobody likes a line breaker. They may be narrowing their idea of what what makes this ideological is, in many ways, that most ideological systems often have, Lacan calls it a quilting point, or some notion or idea that sort of ties everything together. A lot of right-wing ideology, this notion of freedom. Freedom isn't free, or, this notion of America almost as if it's a sort of a saturated symbol. Well, in this case, it's the immigrant, and that there are outsiders that we should be united against, and we should be united against them underneath the American flag, and they are trying to get in. They're doing something unfair and wrong. And so that is a helpful illusion to have because it makes the world make sense. It creates a fiction that you can live under. But there's a tremendous amount of information that has to be repressed, or in fact, you can also, what often happens in these systems, this is all psycholinguistic. The immigrant gets to own all the projections. You don't have to think about your own difficulties in a certain way because you can project them into the immigrant.
Right.
And so it offers again that really tidy fiction illusion that one can live under. But what's missing in that, what was challenging is if you were to take my friend from Tennessee and we were having, I said, well, what if you realize that a certain percentage, I don't know what percentage of it, 30% of those are actually women and their babies. They are fleeing because if they stay where they're at, they might be killed. Or that they see a promise for a world where their children may have the things you've been able to give yours. What should they do? Should they stay where they're at? And if you were to say that, would it open up the possibility of some level of accommodation? Doesn't mean that he suddenly has to, throw away his entire platform of immigration. But there's the possibility of being able to think about this differently. Now, as an aside, we've talked in here about Slavoj Žižek, and he got in a lot of trouble, and he made a lot of his friends upset when he said that he said it in a way that was very provocative. But what he said is, as long as we focus on the immigrant, we are never going to fix the global problem. Why in this world where we have enough resources are there places that people want to flee from? The right focuses on erecting borders, and the left focuses on creating a space for these people to come to. The real issue, neither are tackling. Why are there places in the world that people need to run from? That's what we need to fix. And that an ideological system keeps you from being able, the illusion of the system keeps you from being able to directly deal with the thing you need to. We don't often ask ourselves that question.
No, it's probably just too tough for us. And besides, if you're in this ideology, one or the other, or ones that are out there, it's comforting in some ways. It's not. I mean, it's nice to have all the people around you agreeing with this, and you have it. You feel like part of the team, if you will, and it's a safe space in some ways to kind of protect it. But what you were saying was, this is all fiction. Because there's a bigger question.
And we would say that again from a Lacanian perspective. That's why the non-duped error. If you really want to get in trouble, then in a way talks about this notion of red and blue pills. Mm-hmm. That to truly be awake, if there was such a thing that you could take a red pill that made you completely aware as best you could the world around you, it would be a buzzing confusion. You'd be assaulted by all the things around you.
There's too much going on, and contradictory thoughts, and ability, and ambiguity, and so forth.
Yeah, this very table, would it is far more in flux than our senses allow us to know. The world around us is far more in flux than the world that our senses allow us to know. So there is no such thing as direct perception. There's always apperception. It's always filtered through both the limitations and the developmental maps that we've been given. And an ideology is just a specific kind of map. And it's usually the sort of map that an entire culture moves under. There is capitalist, there is socialist. Socialism also is like somebody sent me a meme today, one of my friends from Tennessee, very conservative, he said that this is no longer Democrats versus Republican, this is America versus socialists, Trump 2020. And you'll notice that now that could be either a clever marketing tool that Karl Rove somewhere decided to come up with.
What happened to that guy?
I think he
somewhere in the background something's going on. I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, but
but it's a wonderful sort of ideological device because it's an attempt to be able to say that if you don't support Trump, you're not an American.
Right.
And you're this thing called a socialist, which is what Lacan would call an empty signifier. What does that really mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like Zizek talks about this, the Schrodinger is Mexican. And if you'll know that a lot of this immigration, that there are the Mexican individuals coming across the border illegally, either stealing our jobs or doing nothing and soaking up all our Social Security. How can they do both? So
yeah, you run into a contradiction at some point where it doesn't make sense.
Well, what Zizek was saying is because it's an empty signifier. It doesn't really mean anything. Not really. It's just a way to be able to bind all these things together. So when you say the word socialist, what does that really mean?
Really?
And the person on with the bumper sticker, if you ask them, they may come up with a whole bunch of list of things. Many of them which could be just as contradictory. You know, so let me get this right. Socialists want to do this and this and this. And when you begin, well, wait a minute, have you met one of them? Well, no, he said they're everywhere. Well, where is this? Well, you know, they're Bernie Sanders. And so it sounds like, you know, Bernie Sanders is, you know, so, and then when you begin to unpack that, well, you know, it doesn't. So you're saying Bernie Sanders wants the government to outlaw churches? Is that what you're saying? And then there often becomes this sort of like, but there is an empty signifier in there dancing around that is there simply as a placeholder to keep this ideological system in place. It sort of whirls around it, right?
Right, and the contradictions don't seem to matter. I mean, if you're watching the times we're in and all the media and what's happening in politics and so forth, it seems like there are direct contradictions, but they're either excuses or they just go on without commenting about these things. I find that very difficult to understand.
Well, in the commentary, like, and it can be difficult in lots of ways because some folks on the left, and there are folks on the left criticizing that the Me Too movement and awareness of misogyny and abuse itself, if we're not careful, could become something other than we intend it to be. That's a controversial subject because I'm not really sure, you know, there's ideology in that statement too. But it is possible that, you know, if you go back to Zizek's idea about where we get tripped up in immigration, if we focus, and I think we mentioned before, he talked a lot about some of this conflict with transgender rights, that what often seems to happen is we're just finding a way to integrate one more person into the world instead of this one more person may be able to have the seeds for change for the entire world. So those on the outside, if you ask in Nazi Germany, it talks about the figure of the Jew. For the Nazi ideology, they were like, you know, again, they were like Schrodinger's Mexican. On one level, they were degenerates who did nothing but sucked up resources, but they also controlled everything. You know, and like, right. Okay, how could that be? But you know, but that's because in the end, they served a purpose, and unconsciously they structured this entire system. But if you were to ask someone on the outside, it is from them they might be able to observe, well, wait a minute, that their vantage point might allow them to see something that people who are trapped in this ideological system can't see, if they were able to speak. So how do we give voice to the marginalized in such a way that they may be able to change the majority? They may deliver a truth that creates an act of accommodation on a societal level. And we have to be careful. We have to find a way to be able to keep that voice intact and able to speak. So.
Yeah, I think we need to have that available to folks. But I mean, you at first it's this issue of insight. Am I really thinking what do I believe in and why? Let's get to that point as well and begin to assess things. I don't think people are analytically or otherwise being critical thinkers about it. It seems like we're just accepting of some things because we want to fit in, almost on Maslow, one of the hierarchies of
seriously, others, you know? And this is kind of some rabbit hole stuff, but if you follow some of the Zizek stuff, he would say beware of critical thinking too.
Okay. Because
there's often a need to get lost, and it's often in the stumbling that you find yourself. So it is possible that the repentant racist may have an awareness and may be a potential for change that even the marginalized individual may not be. So it may require the stumble and the fall in and then a retroactive critical analysis of the stumble to be able to move the individual forward in the way that we want them to go. You may have to fall down before you can rise up. That may be the model how this is supposed to happen. You may need to lick a few light switches before before you can be aware of yourself. You may have to move, and you have to move through the symptom in a way to get to the sort of truth you need to.
Okay. Well, final idea about this with this ideology notion, and I like the way you tied it into the OCD a little bit there, but the idea of, is this healthy? I mean, to just sort of cling on to the ideology and wear the certain hat and do the certain things, where does it end up? But is it healthy, and how do we get out of it? What do you think?
Well, there's not a lot of, there is some data, and it's often filtered through politics. But oftentimes folks who, depending on how rigid an ideological edifice or system is, and depending if it's on the left or the right, we do know that individuals, particularly if their ideological system is more tribal, to the degree that it is tribal, there are higher incidences of hypertension, diabetes, there are all these sort of ill health effects. So there's some data to suggest that there's something difficult and dangerous about any sort of rigidly held ideological system.
Right.
But I suspect that my friends in Tennessee, one of my friends in Tennessee did have a heart attack like 10 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago. So that matter. Watch me, I'll suddenly keel over right now, but
No.
I'll try not to.
Try not to.
But I suspect though that on some level it probably is healthy to have some sort of system. And if you stay within a context where there are no cognitive dissonance, if you watched only one news channel, if you've existed within a certain bubble, you probably would be relatively comfortable in that. And we do know that in terms of measures of happiness, it depends on how you, again, that's a hard thing to operationalize.
Right.
But folks who skew toward the right report higher levels of happiness. They report, so the more conservative you are in those sense. And that makes a certain amount of sense because if you move toward the left, you're much more aware of systemic problems. If your ideological system says that God will sort it out in the end, then you can rest easier than someone who believes that we have to fix these things.
We got to work hard to fix these things, yes.
So, I think that's part of what's insidious. We may be saying that to move outside of one's ideological system is to risk health and to risk, it may put you in some sort of danger. If no one learns through suffering, then you're going to have to move through something painful to get outside of an ideological system. So, to answer your question, maybe it would be better if we were all Nazis.
Okay, that was not exactly the answer I was looking for.
I will say this
though. I don't know
though.
how to recover from that one.
I will say this though. They had cool uniforms.
Yeah, the uniforms were cool. All right, so we get other than that. This is going to get us into big trouble.
Actually, but this is also one of the things that this guy Zizek writes about, because Nazi ideology was very much about. It was not a sex and drugs and rock and roll. It was very much about discipline, rigidity. It was about not even God. I don't know. You weren't supposed to everything in moderation, so there were all this sort of. And so Zizek says the reason why their costumes looks cool because that's where all the renounced pleasures surfaced. That because they weren't allowed to kick it up at home, they would have these Nazi would look like socialist. Or no, they weren't socialists. That's another. That was okay. Maybe we can talk about that.
Right.
But
clarify
that they weren't. That's why they had these giant rallies where everybody's it's like this sort of political orgy rallies.
Right.
And that the ideological system allowed a return of the repressed in moments like that. So their uniforms were cool because the contents were under pressure. And that's where some of this pleasure surfaced,
Wow.
and those Nazi boots.
You have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today. You have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
GJAC is ultimately, I think, pushes for a collective action. Part of why he still maintains the label communist is not because there are various communisms, but at the core of all of them, even the ones that went horribly awry, is the idea that somehow we need to be in this together. Right. And that universal emancipation is the one point that all subjects should be aimed for. And so if these rules, they may focus on individual emancipation, but they may take us away from a universal emancipatory stance. And so he may have some conflict over that. Like, we have to be careful that we don't allow ourselves to be merely individuals, and that we are not thinking about the universal struggle for all of us to be able to experience a level of life that is really only afforded to people in the first world. So,
right.
You know.
You have a story to tell. Columbus Podcasting can tell your story with a world-class video podcast of professional quality. Viewers and listeners can access podcasts anywhere, anytime. ColumbusPodcasting.com. Give us a call today.
Let's figure this out.
Right.
All right, Dan Rose, how are you, sir? What's up?
It's it's Friday.
Well, it's going to be Friday for the rest of the day. I don't know how to break the news to you on that.
It will. It didn't come soon enough.
Yeah, long week, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's I got if this week were like a disease, I would say it was shingles.
Ooh, that's a rough one right there for some reason. So let's hope that it gets better. It's a short time frame there. All right. So what else is up? How do you deal with a shingles week?
You Colt 45. I mean, like buckets of it. Just okay. You know?
Well,
I'll tell you what.
That's what you got. That's what you got.
Colt 45 and pork skins, fried pork skins.
Fried pork skins.
I call that a Saturday night.
I hate to say this, but my son's on a keto diet, and for some reason there are pork skins at my at my house.
On the
I
keto
apologize to the universe, as a matter of fact, for that. But they can't do carbs, but they can do fat.
Pork skins.
They can do fat. It's crazy.
You know, well, I
crazy
dated a
world.
girl for a while. It smelled like pork skins.
Oh,
I just felt that was really couldn't go anywhere.
Do we need to know that?
Just
for that.
people have smells.
Well, yeah, I guess they do. I hope this session today is not really
Oh, it's
about
nothing to do with smells. Nothing. It's just heat.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it's Friday too.
It
It's
is.
the end of a long week, and
It is.
hey,
It's been
here
tough.
it is Friday, and I think people really do feel better on the Friday going to the weekend. We're all working. We're trying to move toward.
I'm not working.
Yeah, our own time and so forth, and have free time during the weekend. So.
Every moment of my life is free time. I mean, somebody's paying for it, but it's free time for me.
Right. So they have no idea what they're getting for their money,
No,
but they're giving you money and you're enjoying it, right? So
That's
there's nothing
how
wrong.
it works.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I'm down for that. But yeah, so what's been on your mind lately?
Well, yeah,
What's
I
kind
thought
of these things happening?
We got to come up with something to talk with, and I thought about this. Now, in
Okay.
some ways, this is a little. My son would say this is a stale meme in a way. He might criticize, but
Okay.
he's 47. What does he know? I
I think you said on the last show he was 12, I believe. But okay,
maybe
we'll do
he's
the
12.
math later.
He's
I think.
12 going on 47.
Okay,
But
good.
I thought about this because I've been reading this this book by Slovenian philosopher and psychoanalyst Slavoj Žižek.
Yes. Okay.
Somebody I read. I've occasionally dip into the guy's work, and reading that got me to think about some things.
Sure.
And also I was at home eating some vegan chili on a bed of brown rice with some Gardein vegan beef tips.
Okay.
We could get some sponsorship out of this because I ate a lot of
think,
Gardein.
I have no problem with all the sponsors you've mentioned so far.
Good,
we
yeah.
need to talk with those guys.
Except for my Uncle Vinny, who in his meth lab, that was the one that
Yeah, Uncle Vinny is no longer with us. I understand after the explosion.
Yeah, it was an
so-
explosive venture. But I'm also, and there was one of them YouTubes come up and talks about the black pill. You know?
Yes. Oh, yes. Now I
The black
remember.
pill, we can talk about it.
We had a little bit of text back and forth about that, just
About
a
the-
little
yeah.
bit. I was confused because I was thinking, well, we had the red pill, we had the blue pill,
Well,
and
you got-
now the black
There's
pill
also the
is
white
here.
pill. There's
Oh,
a
and the
black
white
pill,
pill.
a white pill. There may be other pills, but and the way to think how this might be relevant and maybe useful to some is that
I don't know
there
if
is
there's a rainbow pill, but go ahead. All
could
right,
be
then
good.
we're
That
gonna-
was last week. That was last week.
That's right.
If you know that scene in The Matrix
Yes.
where Bob Hope is. I mean, that's
No.
not,
No.
That's
Not
Oh, well, that didn't happen.
close.
Okay.
All right.
Nobody remembers who Bob Hope is. Do they
I'm the
remember?
only one in the room, and
Remember.
probably listening ever to this. But
Okay.
go ahead.
So there's this idea that in the film, I think it's Neo is the good guy, right?
Right.
So
I think
he's
that's the
being
name.
confronted by Orpheus, right? It's Orpheus?
Yes. Yes.
Orpheus. And he asks him, he says, look, now that you know things, you can take the blue pill and you can go back to sleep and this never happened. If you take the red pill, you're going to wake up and you're suddenly going to see how things really are. And you have two choices.
Yes.
So he chooses the red pill and he wakes up and then boom, he sees how things are. Well, a few years back, my son would say longer than a few years back, there was this notion of being red pilled and how you could get woke. And that both the left and the right use this as sort of a way to talk about things. That to be red pilled is to suddenly be aware of things. It was often talked in the alt-right community and even in some of the incel community about how you suddenly see how things really are and different forms of woke. On the left, it could mean something different as well. But again, it's just this state
Right.
of wokeness.
Yes, waking up to a new understanding, new vision of what's really going on behind the scenes. In other words,
Well, there's a wonderful scene in the Zizek film. I think it's in The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, but it may be in The Pervert's Guide to Film, where he replays that scene,
okay.
and where he's in Neo's place, and he says, I want a third pill. I don't want either one of these.
Okay.
And
my sons always wanted the third choice. When I'd read in the parenting book to give them either you want to do this or you want to do that, and they always
that's why he's eating pork skins. It's really, he should have whatever
from another
whatever you did back then.
There's a lot of things undoable that happened.
That's
back
right.
then,
So now
we'll see what happens.
He has a diet of pork skin. If he came up with a pork skin diet, I don't know how that would work.
It's somewhere in this keto diet, but don't ask me, and I'm not interested.
Keto.
Thank you.
Keto. Yes. But so that there are well, Zizek's point is that there is a way in which we may think that we've been woke, but that's actually an even greater trap. That to think that you suddenly see things clearly may be to be even further embedded and further trapped in things. So a wonderful example that he uses is that in California, they banned straws, and now lots of people are buying metal straws they take with them. They go to restaurants.
Right. Okay.
That makes
sense.
So this could be an example of being red pilled. For instance, suddenly you realize the straws, and the reason why they banned the straws is because I think the straws were affecting Liza Minnelli somehow. I don't know.
Well, no. What I was thinking was there's so much plastic that suddenly in the ocean we have this nation of.
There's a lot of plastic in Liza Minnelli.
Absolutely. I was trying to move through that, but I didn't get very far. Go ahead.
Is she still alive?
Yes.
Okay, Katie. Okay. It's the plastic. It lasts forever. But so too much plastic, it's like killing turtles and stuff, right?
So they went to paper in California, made it a law, and moved on. Yeah,
okay. There's nothing wrong with limiting plastic use, carbon footprint, but the problem potentially that is, as opposed to dealing with the root of the problem, of thinking about, wait a minute, what is, why do I live in a world where things are going into the ocean? What are the broader things going on here? You simply affect a small local change that may have no big consequence whatsoever. Right. Another example that Zizek gives is if you go to Starbucks and you buy a Frappuccino or a Crappuccino, whatever you buy there, and every time you buy one, you give $1 goes to support a third world country, family out of poverty. Okay. And Zizek, so again, nothing wrong with helping, but why would you question? There's a bigger question. Why do we live in a world where there's enough of everything, but there are people starving? So the question would be, you are lulled into thinking you're making a change or a difference, but you're actually just staying asleep enough in the matrix to perpetuate the very thing that has caused all these inequalities.
Okay.
And so there is a third pill, or maybe you decide to stay in the matrix and you attempt to be able to understand it from within, maybe even undermine it in a way, or maybe you channel it or direct it in a way that may create larger change. And so that's the whole idea behind, and that was the potential third pill for Zizek. But there's this notion of the black pill. This is the notion that you wake up and that everything is crap, and it's a form of nihilism. Okay. It's the idea that when you really see how things are, you say, there's a philosopher. What's his name? I'll think of his name, but he was partly inspiration for the TV series True Detective, the first season. Okay. If you ever saw that.
Yeah.
But he's an antinatalist, and an antinatalist is someone who doesn't believe that human beings should reproduce. We should just die out. And he has a nihilist philosophy in which he sort of sees the human race as like a bacteria. We've infected the planet, and at some point it'll develop the right sort of antibodies and we'll all be gone. Mm-hmm. And so that is sort of a form of the black pill, sort of like you see things and boom, everything is horrible, and so you have the potential to succumb to nihilism.
Right, got it.
There's also a white pill, and the white pill would be the ability to, that would be religion, or in fact some evangelical folks call it the white pill, that you suddenly see that there is, wait a minute, there's God, and so there is redemption, or there is something better outside of all this and whatnot. And the point of bringing up any of those sorts of pills is that each of them represent a way of being able to dance and deal with reality.
Right.
And all of them may have a shortcoming, or they offer some sort of solution. And they have a parallel, I think, in some of the things you and I have been talking about here in terms of how do people engage with themselves and the world in such a way that, I don't want to use the word happy, because that's a pill in of itself. As an aside, there's a famous philosopher, Alain Badiou, and he calls it the happiness industrial complex.
Oh, okay.
And that part of what drives, if there were a happiness pill, for instance, it comes in the form of, he uses, Zizek talks about this too, of Western Buddhism, that we all need to start buying meditation apps and doing yoga, don't do yoga.
Don't do it.
But,
no, I got you. Though.
There's a couple of jokes in there. I'm not going to go there.
I know.
But
it's good that you can hit on it and then go back to the topic.
That's because I woke up at 4 this morning. I'm tired. That's the only reason. But
yes.
So the idea that where was I at with this thing? Oh, it was the yoga or and all this sort of stuff and meditation, and all those are a form of either the black or the blue or the red pill. They could be the blue pill because they allow you to become better consumers, better cogs in the machine of capitalism, without ever really questioning things. Like, for instance, again, why do we need to meditate more? The things that you feel, the fact that you can't sleep, or the fact that you have you're always anxious, maybe something you need to know as opposed to being numbed from. And the goal would be, how do we engage with ourselves? That would be a wonderful example of that there is an engagement with your own suffering in such a way that may inform you maybe how to change your life, may be able to inform you on how to be able to make the lives of others better. But none of those are the sort of pills that offer a fix that either give you numb you into sleeping or give you a false sense of being awake. And so how does all that sound?
Well, it's really interesting because the whole idea of being woke and becoming, I don't know if we've defined that very well. I mean, it's being woke to my ideas and you going along with my ideas versus being woke to the general consensus. So some groups will consider you woke and others may not at the same time. So I'm just curious about how we defined being aware. But it's awareness. It's more than what we're aware of now. It's an additional awareness or larger awareness.
Well,
how's that sound?
Yeah, I dig that. Even the term woke is already, in a way, carries with it a certain ideology, a certain politics, and a certain texture that allows you to be maybe closer to something important, but it also may blind you to some things, because if they were to offer a critique even of the notion of being woke, does that mean you're always awake? That you never have to worry about going to sleep again? That means that now you have a hold of a certain truth, and does that mean now that if you're not careful, if you have a hammer, everything is a nail?
Right.
There's a potential trap in there too.
Absolutely. The idea that you've got the best idea, or your idea is the way it is for others, and it may not be that way. In fact, it may be, maybe you woke and it's a nightmare,
well, it's interesting because
or really not realistic. Maybe not.
Well, and Bion talks about this. I talk about that guy sometimes, but also Zizek mentions this in the book that I'm reading right now, and the idea that we don't wake up from a nightmare or a dream because as a way to escape the unpleasant thoughts of the dream. We wake up so we can go to sleep from the truths that the dream are trying to tell us.
Wow.
And so waking up is actually a form of avoiding something, a suffering inherent. Zizek would say a hard kernel that you can't do something with. And that sort of puts that on its head. So even the idea of being woke.
Yeah, It may not, as you mentioned, happiness. It may not make you happy to be woke. As a matter of fact, it may bring more anxiety into your life that you have to have that sleep you're talking about.
Well, it's a wonderful example, like of, and they often talk about the historical texture and the context of all the things that we do, and we often have this view. That there was a thing called the Dark Ages, and people ran around that they were dumb, or they thought the Earth was flat, all this sort of stuff, and then we look back, but you and I are both here in the South, and we look back and say there was a time when we were, we had slavery, but we've passed that. We're now, and so this notion of progress, that we've moved, that there is a place in the past that we can point to as a marker of how much we've grown and how better we are. Folks like Zizek would like to turn that on the head, because depending on how you look at it, there are actually more slaves in the world now than there ever were before. And that to prop up the first world, we have to crush so much of the third. That even as we speak, there are children being worked to death for the elements that go into our phones, or all of these things, the diamonds that we wear, and that for us to be in this place of comfort, to prop up our luck requires that there is an ocean of suffering, and that we are floating on that ocean, and to wake to that would be too much. To think, and I'm as you know, I may have mentioned this, but I'm a vegetarian.
Yes.
I mentioned that before.
Yes.
And I remember the when I suddenly decided to become a vegetarian, I was at this club in Fort Lauderdale, and PETA, not the bread, but the organization,
right?
They had these things going on. They had these videos, and so you had to walk through a gauntlet of these mass farming videos, and and all these sorts of things, and you'd walk through it, you're like, holy cow. And then when I got here, I was like, I can't unsee that. And so that can be a form of being awake. If it becomes an ideological trap, and maybe a tad fascistic, if it becomes the one thing that you devote yourself to, and you say to yourself, if we all became vegetarians, the world would be perfect, right? Right.
So yeah, somebody could have that idea.
And and there are so many different flavors of that from elements of Catholicism to elements of ecological awareness, feminism, all these things. If you're not careful, whatever truth they have and whatever importance they have, they can become a unitary, a single thing, and as opposed to being able to move and make changes in the world, you're often sort of trapped by them. They offer you an answer to the conflict that ails you, but it keeps you from being able to move outside of that. You're trapped by it. And that's always a problem, I think.
It seems to be that we're just swapping ideologies in some way. I mean, we thought we believed that now we have something more as we're woke, and but it partitions us off into groups, or even an individual, but certainly into a group, and then there's always the opposing group. So you never quite finish this job of being woke, it seems like.
It's interesting because, again, Zizek's sort of a Marxist, and one of the things that a Marxist critique of diversity is that the more we begin to identify with certain tribal groups, the less likely we are to unify in a way that may generate global change. A Marxist equation is that it's class conflict,
right.
That the workers are being crushed by the owners of capital, and so if we fix that, it'd fix everything. But there is this critique that if we stay divided. And this is Zizek, not me, but he talks about how, like, whenever we recognize the suffering of a subset of our population, and I think the most recent would be the transgendered individuals, that we run the risk of not allowing the truth they bring to the table to arrive. Instead, what we do is we find a way to sell them jeans and tennis shoes and make all sort. They become just another tribal contingent that we can sell goods to, and the goal is that they become a market share instead of a force for change. So.
No, and it seems like it's economics, but also the politics of things at the time when you're using the market, the Marxist reference that it is sort of that entire nation was dealing with that, and based on that philosophy or that ideology that had both politics and economics and people's well-being and the differences in class.
I got a lot of class. You've hung on me, right? You'd realize I got class.
Man, do you have class?
I got class.
I said that
Actually, in about an hour, I got class. No, hey, it's funny because we also, you and I would talk once, about, there's this guy, Jordan Peterson. You're a big fan? You got a tattoo?
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to tell you where, I'm not going to tell anybody where it is, but he can make it dance.
Okay.
And, but you got.
Yes, we have talked about
Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
And he represents sort of a response to this in a way. If Zizek's response comes from the left, Peterson's comes from the right, and his idea seems to be that there is and it's at the most conservative thought is the idea that there are some core beliefs, some things that are inherent to Western civilization or civilization in general, and those need to be held on to firmly, and they are often we run the risk of losing them. So for Peterson, it's individuality, it's personal responsibility.
Yep.
And so, as opposed, he would espouse that as the thing that we need and the thing that is missing, and that the further we move away from those sorts of things, from central myths, Christianity and things like that, they all anchor us and tether us, and that he's very skeptical of any notion of progress.
Right.
Because he often, his criticism with Marx, he had a debate with Zizek. It wasn't really much of a debate, really. I guess it was a debate. But he kept, his thought was that the folks who dare to create change in the way Marx was advocating don't really know what they're thinking. They had run the risk of losing something central and important, and then something bad is going to happen. So, Peterson's battle cry is clean your room.
Right. Yeah, he wrote the 12-step of that. I'm sorry, blocking on the title right now, but it's one of his latest books. So the notion is personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Really?
I'm not very good at that.
I was going to say, not
really
that,
my
but
forte.
what I was going to say was
forte.
that it's a nice idea to take that personal responsibility and clean up your own room, clean up your own house, make sure your thoughts and your progression, as opposed to progressives in larger sense, but the individual
here's a progressive critique of that, though. While you're busy cleaning up your room, you're not noticing all the mess around you. So you literally have taken the potential for the movement of the species, of the potential for things to move forward, and now you're simply focusing on your dirty socks. So it could be a form of the blue pill. It could be a way of forget about the possibility of changing things, forget about the possibility of growing the world in some ways. Just go home and clean your room.
Right.
And so revolution becomes either delayed, minimized, or it's done away with, but I guess your room be clean.
Yeah, and not the groupthink that we were talking about. Okay, so the idea of the black pill bring us.
That's nihilism. Yeah.
So when you say, but isn't that the personal responsibility? I mean, the nihilism is, if I understand it right, that your enjoyments of your own personal life and so forth, and you don't see a way of going forward.
Well,
nihilism. You need to enjoy this now.
Well, I think that is a form of nihilism. I think in its broadest perspective, it is a sense of the futility of everything and the pointlessness of everything, and that hedonism is a form of could be considered a form of nihilism.
Right.
Right. It's like suddenly you just join Motley Crue. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like
yes. So I understand it. So. So many pills to choose from at this point in time.
So
and I know where does a person go with this?
Well,
these choices?
Here's what I think that could be useful in thinking about this is that in each of these ways of thinking about the world, they're all a good start. I don't think any of the pills necessarily is bad, be it white, black, red, or blue. The blue one might be somewhat problematic because it simply asks you to be able to go back to sleep. But maybe there's nothing. But there may be a benefit in that. I think the thing to ask is, they're beginnings and not the end. I think I've talked about this before. If somebody comes in for therapy and they sit down on the couch and they say, "I want to commit suicide. I want to die," that's a good place to start. It'd be a lousy place to stay for too long and a lousy place to get stuck. But that's an okay start. That is where you were at. And to meet someone in that place is the beginning of being able to move, to do something with it. Each of those pills, I think, offer the possibility. If with the red pill, if you are suddenly awake to something that you weren't before, how do you move forward with that? How do you dance with it? How do you make it a truth that can be both particular and universal in its application?
And especially if it contradicts something you've believed in before, right? As a result of it.
You grow. Think of, in my lifetime, I have watched with women's rights, feminism. There is suddenly new ideas entered the world, and there were those who may be extreme on either side. I think it's Andrea Dworkin who said all heterosexual sex is rape because women can't possibly consent because they're under inequality. And it's an extreme statement,
right.
But it functions in a way like a bit of poetry or metaphor. It certainly could wake you up. But then what do you do with it?
Right.
Where do you move with it? And I think that is the thing that each of these pills asks. Not that one is better than the other. To suddenly, for instance, with Nietzsche, nihilism is a step toward being able to create your own life. You saw something similar with the existentialists and whatnot. That there's something about the realization of futility or absurdity that could plunge you in despair. Or it could mean you can do things that you couldn't do before.
Well, that certainly makes sense to me. And just a while back we talked about the euthymic window. This
my favorite band.
Yeah, I got it. And on this continuum of really, because the extremes are not healthy, somewhere in the middle, and finding yourself available to the moment and really engaged in the process.
And if you think about that notion of the euthymic window. It's more probable that at each developmental phase and as we grow, the window has to grow with us. We have to be able to accept more or less based on where we're at. And that requires some flexibility. That requires our ability to be disturbed and suffer enough to do something with it. So we, again, that Guy Bion, I talk about him all the time. The idea that we have to grow a mind. I think I've used this example in the past and here that before I didn't have a child until I was 40. And at the birth of my son, just as I was in the process of fathering a son, my son was sonning a father. I had to grow and he had to grow and I had to grow both. I've never had a 12-year-old boy as a son, and he's never had me as a dad, and so it is a two-way street. There's something about the needing to be opened. There is it isn't that my son maybe and I woke each other and continue to woke each other, but we do generate moments of, in that euthymic window, where we feel wonderful things, but we also feel not so wonderful things. And each of those, it requires us to be something more than we were the year prior. If that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. And these sort of developmental things are going on at the same time. And then you have to relate. You have to build a relationship between the two of you in that case. And, it's not always the easy thing to do, sort of the acceptance of the other father-son issue.
And that's where that notion of like there are forms of emotional fascism. There are familial totalitarian states in which the growth of the other is too much. It is when my son's interest and his development does not coincide with the image I have of what I want him to be, I'm suddenly confronted with a tension. There is a minimal, at least, sometimes maximal amount of suffering in that moment. And what do I do with it?
Right.
Do I, beat him until he puts the football helmet on, or do I?
No.
Well,
that's not one.
It's a lot of work.
That's
Just
not
saying,
one.
it's not a lot. Or do I say, okay, there is something about who he is and how he is ising himself, how in his going on being he may be forcing me to go on being in some ways that I haven't had to do before. He pushes and pulls me out of my comfort into someplace new, just as I do that by my presence to him. And we do that dance together, dancing forward towards something that neither of us can completely name, though there is some sort of cultural mandate on where we're headed. At some point he leaves the house and I no longer have to pay for things.
Having adult sons, let me just break that myth right there. You will continue.
At some point he's going to start making me money, right? At some point I'll get some of this back. They'll be like,
Dad, can you loan me? Is not a real statement, by the way. Can you loan
no
me money?
Interest.
There's no interest. There's no principal either. So
yeah, well, I never had those. I don't have principles.
Well. Nice. All right. So I'm glad you got that comment in. All right. So what do we do? I mean, let's say if someone is woke, one of these ideologies, taking one of these pills and sort of seeing something in a different way, in a new way that maybe challenges them and their thoughts, or maybe not. It's just a bit of enlightenment. Not everybody took the pill. Not everybody's going to have that same reaction. There's always going to be this tension. You mentioned the push and pull between people who agree and don't agree and have different versions of what it should be like. That seems to be an eternal struggle in some ways for us.
Well, and this is a component in we mentioned the Zizek guy. He makes a point in saying that conflict is inherent, even down to the level of physics. That we have this notion that there's a guy named Todd McGowan. He made a statement that the ultimate, again, this sounds political, but it has a point. The ultimate conservative notion is it is what it is.
Right.
So, and that's I think that's law of non-contradiction. A is A, B is B, A is not B, that sort of thing. And but at the level of physics, quantum physics, this all becomes blurred. We don't have. There seems to be something inherent in the very structure of the world around us that makes it fuzzier than we would like it to be.
Right.
And Freud's version of mental health is the capacity for ambivalence, the capacity to entertain that A may not just be A, it may be other things as well, and that there is flux and there is flow and there is tension, and it's inherent in things. And that may be a state that we may need to be able to find ourselves in at various points, both not just as a nation or as a culture, but individually. The person who comes in and sits on the couch and says, "I want to die," the reason that's a good start is there's the possibility of them seeing in the word suicide something more than just what it is on the surface, that there is a complexity and inherent in there. It may begin that they want to die, but that it may go to a place that they want parts of themselves to die.
Right.
And it may be that they want to go, that the feelings they have, they want those to go. They want the life that they find themselves trapped in dead. We began in a place where there's an isness. It is what it is. That if we stay in there too long, it becomes like a shell. We can't grow out of. But over the course of the work that we do, it begins to mean more and more and more than what initially sounded nihilistic and destructive is ultimately liberating, because it started us on some path towards something.
No, I like the idea. There's a bit of what you were saying a moment ago about this awakening and this idea of new ideas and new ideology. But it also can become sort of self-centered in a way, maybe even narcissistic. And we've talked about that plenty of times on the show. So it's the ability to empathize and connect with other people. I think that's a basic issue that we've kind of
and think about the empathy and
with.
connecting with yourself, the empathy and to connect with ideas, to be able to there is something when you see yourself and someone as whole. That wholeness, in a way, is a metaphor for a certain level of chaos held in tension. It is that there is a complexity there. There is a muchness, not a too muchness or a too little, but it is pregnant with something. And I think in some ways that's the opposite of narcissism. The narcissist sees both themselves and the world in a way that they are trapped in, and your ability to move into something more complex and something more fluid allows you the opportunity to grow. The narcissistic position is ultimately one that is useful but simply defensive. Just like the person who comes in and says that they want to die. That's also in some ways a defensive position. It may be the best thing they can come up with in light of all the suffering they're feeling in this moment. Hence, it's a good place to start. You always have to start somewhere, and that's as good a place as any. But you have to keep moving.
Yeah, especially when you struggle so much in your personal life that you're going to a therapist and you're going to finally say what you've been thinking and feeling on the inside, and allow a person to connect with you and have a discussion about that and maybe see some options for yourself.
As long as the insurance is good.
Okay. That's true if you're in private practice. That's
right.
Yeah. All right. Well, people have to make a living, but I'm thinking all that's coming out wrong here on the video.
Sorry, it's not I got to make a living. Yeah. I got to afford a boat.
A boat. Do you want to rethink that? Maybe I don't
really want a boat. I'm not much for. But I could put it in my pool. I guess like a dinghy.
Yes, get a small boat.
I just like saying the word dinghy because something about that just makes me kind of giggle.
Yeah, it does. Me too. So there we are. And I'm not sure why. All right. Well, all right. So final thoughts on this in terms of just this. You started out talking about the black pill. You talked about the blue and the red pill, and even the white pill.
The white pill. That'd be religion or some sort of faith.
But it almost seems that there could be. I don't know, an infinite number of these pills, depending on the particular ideology or awakening or enlightenment that a person may have.
Well, maybe the takeaway is this, is that regardless of the pill, all of those pills might be a good start. But if they offer the possibility of some sort of permanent change, if they offer a solution with a capital S, then be wary of them. That they are... they're potentially a trap, and that there is, just as another part of the reason why I use my example of my son is that it's a place in my life that I can truly feel I'm growing whether I want to or not. He's about to be a teenager. I thought the level of sarcasm was high before, but now we've reached
just wait
level 5. It's and I find myself
DEFCON.
That's right.
I
find myself. I don't think I've had this many murderous thoughts in my entire. It's like but all of that discomfort, he moves me out of that euthymic window into some place that I have the potential to be able to grow. Just as I move him. In those moments of tension and the dance between us, we move. And my guess is any of these pills, if we're not careful, there's a term that since we're hanging on Zizek, tarry with the negative. And the idea is that you have to find a way to dance with these things. It comes from the philosopher Hegel in a sort of vulgar way, or a oversimplified way of looking at what Hegel called dialectics, is that there's a thesis and then an antithesis, and then there is a synthesis, a combination of those two things. So somehow, if you say, I want vanilla, and then somebody says, no, I want chocolate, then you come up with, is it Neapolitan ice cream? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's what it is?
Close.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's...
the third one, I
yeah,
think.
There's this really...
Yeah, the vanilla, the chocolate, and the strawberry, I think.
Is that...
Neapolitan,
okay.
yes.
That's Neapolitan.
For the record, yes.
Okay, I don't know my ice creams. It just seems wrong.
It's wrong all the way.
But you keep your chocolate, your ice cream separate. But a more truthful form of that, or a more useful form, is not just some simple synthesis, but there is movement. There is both can be maintained in some sort of dialectical tension, or in the movement from one to the other. Someone says you want vanilla, they say they want chocolate, and you suddenly discover strawberry. There is the possibility of, and there's something about that dance and that tension that is necessary. And most fascist ideologies, most attempts at a quick fix ruin the possibility, if you're not careful, of the sort of movement you need and to continually grow. That would be one of my criticisms of some of the way research on happiness has been, or even some of the positive psychology stuff. If you're not careful, it runs the risk of ironing over an inherent tension that is necessary for us to continue to move forward in the ways that we need to.
Yeah, that tension is all. Sometimes that's all we can see, all we can focus on, and it comes to this idea of knowing yourself. We talked about this in different ways, but knowing yourself and being a critical thinker, and
I'm very good at being a critical thinker.
Critical thinker, but really surveying the ideas and making some choices about things, and also being empathic and the use of empathy for others, and connecting with the larger group. So, I mean, that's quite a bit of skill that a person has to have in order to make these woke moments really work and move forward.
It's a good thing that I am so skilled. It's a good thing that I am a god among men, or a salad dressing among steak sauce, or trying to work some sort of.
This has to be the wind down of the show, because I'm not understanding anything at this point. I think I've missed.
I did say I got up at 4:00, and I didn't get a lot of sleep last night.
Right. Sorry to hear that.
Well, I can't tell you why.
Uh-oh.
Because the tape's rolling.
Yes,
and
okay.
my wife may hear it.
And we may. Okay.
Odds are not, because she gets enough of me and wouldn't. But actually, between you and me,
we may
talk
have
about
to
this?
Censor this show somehow.
No,
but go ahead. Yeah, whatever.
Okay, here's what happened.
Nobody's listening. Go ahead.
Okay, my wife got her hair cut.
Yes.
And she got it cut, pixie cut, where it looks like she's sort of like she may have joined the military.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And she decided her hair's been turning gray, that she's going to dye her hair gray. And so she has now. She came home yesterday looked as if she had joined the military, and her hair is gray.
Okay.
And and I talked before about
and that kept you up at night. It evidently basically what you said.
Here's a growth moment, because she comes in with the haircut,
gotcha.
And I want to be supportive. I want to be kind.
Sure,
and loving.
you do. Yes.
I want to stick to my guns, that I believe that a woman has control over her body. We all have control over our bodies. No one should be telling what to do. Just because I am her husband, I have no more right to what she does with her body than anybody would.
There you go.
And I want to stay true to that.
Well said.
But at the same time, I'm a little shocked.
Yes. Okay.
And there is a roiling tension. I don't know what to do with this, because I want to stay true to those values, but at the same time, I'm a little taken aback. And
sometimes the facial expression, you may not be able to hold it, or the words that you say, or maybe, but it's kind of a vibe that can be picked up on. You got to be careful
myself. There. Really, that was a nonverbal Does that count as a nonverbal?
That's a nonverbal.
It's a nonverbal.
Not one I thought we'd talk about, but
It is. It is.
It is a
And so
nonverbal.
I did what I was. It was sort of a fight or flight or freeze.
Right.
And that's sort of a freeze kind of thing.
Right.
And so that sort of kept
Well,
me.
it's at that moment where you have to think more about how you're going to approach this if you're going to enter in a conversation about this at all. So there is that choice.
Well, see, and there's a famous saying by it's a Wagner saying from Richard Wagner that what is it? You are healed by the spear that smote you, right? So what that means is that in that moment of suffering, in that moment that I am struggling, there's something that I'm supposed to know about myself and her and the world. There's a place of growth, right?
Right.
But unfortunately, all it did was keep me up last night.
That's it.
But see, that's why I couldn't. And so I finally just said, I'm going to get up and do things.
Yeah, get some things going. But okay, but
I could have used the pill.
It does sound like there might be a pill involved. It does sound like you really need to think through this in terms of maybe having that conversation about it. And you have a right to express yourself. On the other hand, you're married, and
I
have to put that into perspective just a little.
Well, I don't know what to do. I thought about it. This is one of my solution, and this really is not what we call a solution. This actually is a form of maybe the blue pill.
Right.
I thought about just taking my contact lenses out and keep them out on weekend.
Right.
I'm not joking. This really was, as I'm laying in bed at night, I think to myself,
yeah, well, you had plenty of
could
time. You
take-
weren't sleeping, but yes.
I could
that's
take
what I
the
was thinking.
contact lenses out, and then I could just delay this. So how does that sound?
That doesn't sound good at all. And in my experience, the delaying of things mean that thing is going to come out on its own at some point, like a volcano explosion.
Yeah, it's like-
and you're going to say all the wrong things at the wrong
Could,
time.
yeah,
So
I could have, if it make matters worse, and this actually happened. We have a pool, and it's one of those little plastic pools that you buy for $25, but it's still a pool. We have a pool,
No.
and I go downstairs, and I'm looking out the window, and just out of the glance, I say, "Who the heck's cleaning our pool?" And it was my wife, but I didn't recognize her.
Okay.
So I'm
Okay.
like, "Holy cow! This is like, what do I
What
do with this?"
Who is this person in my house? Oh, yes.
So like, it's not. So
that may not be a conversation opener either. So
It's not like, it's not. I'll have to come up with some way.
I mean, the marital therapists talk about, acceptance
Yeah.
and this idea of accepting the other. So maybe it's something you can work on between now and the next time you see her, which is about 10 minutes from now.
Here's what I think I'm going to start. How about, can I start the conversation? Are you trying to kill me? Is that a good start? Is this
no? It's not a good start.
Not a passive, but an actively aggressive attempt to destroy my soul? Can I start there?
As you said, it may not all be about you in this thing. So,
Maybe, yeah.
I'm just
I might
keep
need
an
to-
open mind about that, and enjoy the moment.
I'll try to find a way. I will take that spear that smote me,
Yes,
and I will plunge it into that wound, and hopefully something good will come out of it.
Sounds like a lot of death, and it's headed in your direction. So
It is. It is.
so I would be
Hopefully, she also.
very
The
careful.
odds of her ever seeing this, unless of course you sent it to her,
I'm
are really.
as a matter of fact, this is going straight to her inbox, and let her decide this.
Might,
And consider this an intervention. So
yeah.
the best we can do.
Yeah.
All right, man, that's great. And listen, I have to say, I appreciate the conversation today, but also good luck to you
Gonna need it.
in the moments and minutes and hours to come.
That's right. Like
so-
I said, it was a shingle week. Lots of shingles. Emotional shingles.
Thank you a lot. I'll see you next time.
Hey, you there, the alien watcher. You like watching podcasts, don't you? Just like you like watching for UFOs and other unidentified flying objects, if you get what I'm saying. So tune in to ColumbusPodcasting.com, where all your podcasting needs can be achieved with us. So, we're supposed to be doing a podcast commercial, but my business partner is watching a podcast because he likes to keep his mind on the go all the time, even while recording. It's never a bad time to watch a podcast. It's never a bad time to create a podcast. It's never a bad time to know about podcasting. So, ColumbusPodcasting.com. All your podcasting needs can be achieved.
If you're interested in a podcast, want to be a part of a podcast, or even create your own podcast, come down to the studio on First Avenue and we'll show you how it's done. ColumbusPodcasting.com.
Doing? What's going on? Tell me about it. I like your shirt.
Yeah, I just got back from the gym, and this was so I don't smell good, and I'm you know. But what's that Bob Dylan lyric? I was listening to a Bob Dylan song. He says, "My shirt's tight with sweat, but not as tight as a corner I've painted myself in."
Wow.
So that's what he said. Yeah,
it's kind of deep.
It is. It is. It is.
That's right. He's got a lot of lyrics.
And then one of the lyrics, what I like, he said, "You're gonna need me, honey. You can't make love all by yourself." I thought that was
okay.
I thought that was a good one too.
Yeah, that's pretty blunt, straight out there.
It was, yeah.
Well, it's good to see you, and I know it's been a little while, so let's figure out what's on your mind.
Post
today.
Tarantino. Post. That was the last thing
this
we talked
is
about.
post Tarantino. Now, I did send you some additional materials that maybe we didn't touch on some of the things.
Well, I think you may want to look at those, but I actually I didn't.
Okay, but that's all right. Well, I didn't figure we were going to recap or anything, but I was thinking.
But it was the Atlantic. Those guys. In fact, I wonder if I've actually seen that article. I may have because the Atlantic sends me things through the Facebooks.
Okay. Well, she's a pretty good writer. I mean, they compared her to Hitchens and some other people. I'm not sure she's at that level, but she's done some pretty good work just looking down the list of her articles. This one, I think, captured some of the psychological issues that we were starting to touch on, maybe expanded a few things.
This is Tommy Lauren?
No.
That's a joke.
Oh, that's another.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. There are times when
Dana Stevens.
Those references go
yeah.
But that's good. But maybe we'll do another recap. But I tell you what, why don't we just plan at one point to go back and look at our recent episodes and do I wished I would have said.
Yeah, there are actually a lot of things I wish I wouldn't have said.
Well,
I have a lot of regrets.
In your case, what you did say we should have taken out and edited, but just to kind of comment on what we've done so far in this. All right, so let's get to it.
Well, a couple of things, because this would be potpourri, because there was something you brought up, this Ocean of Confirmation, and also when we leave here, I'm going to be seeing a horror film.
Yes. Okay.
And the horror film is, and so there's we could talk a bit about just the nature, the psychological utility of the horror film, because you had said your wife had said, why would you
possibly go and watch a horror movie?
Yes.
No, but not only her though, but I know members of the family out and groups.
Why would you possibly? Well, what do you think that is?
We
why?
avoid horror movies at all costs.
Why is that? Why do they avoid horror movies? What do you think that is?
I think it's something deep and psychological and scary.
Really?
And let's try to stay away. Maybe. I don't know. I'm guessing it is. But the idea that we stay away from scary things. There's enough scary things in the world. Why would we intentionally?
That's right. Yeah. Why intentionally?
Go that? Right.
Well, so that would then why would someone want a horror movie? Some people choose to see them, and right now the horror genre is sort of ascendant. There are, they're a big name.
They are.
But So, well, why would someone want to go see a horror movie?
I'd like to turn that question back on you. Why would someone want to go see a horror movie? I mean, I'm sure you don't ask the question around here unless you already have an answer pretty close by. So
I do have,
let's go with that.
There are a couple ways to think about this because, we talked before about the, right now the cutting edge of the field is with, where it dovetails with neuroscience.
Right.
And one of the ways to think about any of the things that we do art-wise is we can see them through that lens. And there's this notion of the euthymic window. We've talked about that before.
Yes.
And that is that there is this there is a window with an upper limit and lower limit, and that we attempt to be able to maintain a homeostasis, and that we attempt to be able to remain within that window. And some people's windows are narrower and lower. So when you talk about folks who don't like horror films, the upper register of their euthymic window may be a bit lower than those who do. And so when we get on a roller coaster, for instance,
right,
we want to be at the upper level of that euthymic window. So we take that homeostasis and we tilt it in this direction. So we give ourselves a safe and calculated thrill that just verges on trauma, but it doesn't.
Right.
So it's up in that limit. Just like we
Right.
watch like some people would say, why would you want to watch Old Yeller, right?
Right.
Because, and that's the bottom end of the euthymic window. That is sadness. Like, why watch a movie where, like, everybody dies of cancer,
Right.
and then the kid, their dog gets hit by a car. But people
Right.
do that, right? They do
Yes,
it.
they do,
So
and
in
it's
some
very
ways,
popular.
the weeper, the romantic tragedy is the opposite end of the euthymic window, bottom end, where the horror film is on the upper. So, and thrillers do a little bit of that too, but there is something about the horror film that we generate a false threat, and we place ourselves in the midst of that for that experience. And that experience,
Right.
and another way to think about this too is there was a cat by the name of Daniel Stern. He did a lot of work with infants. He talks about vitality affects.
Okay.
And that, if you ever notice, like, if you have a baby, ever seen one of them babies?
Yes, I
have.
couple at the house there for a number of years.
So yeah,
but
I had one of them too. It was like, oh. And at one point I was like,
scary.
yeah,
Another
speaking
thing.
of horror film.
Yeah,
holy cats.
that's right. Our own personal horror film right there. At the house
And
with us.
I'm convinced that if anybody, when we were about to have a kid, everybody's like, oh, it's great, you're going to love
Oh,
this baby
can't
thing.
wait till you have a
Nobody
kid.
tells me. And then those same people, I'm like, I haven't slept in 6 months.
Right.
I'm covered in all sorts of horrible things. And
You
you're like,
don't smell very good.
and then
either.
the same people that told me how great it was looked at me and said, yeah, isn't it horrible? I'm like, that's not what you were telling me
That's
before.
not how you told me all this wonderful stuff that was going to happen. You should do it too. No, sharing my pain is what this
What
might
were
be.
you
I
up
don't
to
know.
with this thing? Okay, behavior having the baby. Say somebody interact with a baby. There's a way in which to be able to interact with a baby. We do peekaboo, peekaboo. We speak in a way that we accent these vitality affects. We scare them. We do all these sorts of things. So the very development of our nervous system is based on these interactive moments in which we create attenuated near traumas. We literally generate these things.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think about it. A horror film is a little like just grown-up peekaboo.
Right.
So it's from Stern's standpoint, we seek out these experiences that give us this same sort of peekaboo. So what is a horror film? It's just a giant screen version of that sort of peekaboo.
Well, it's almost something that we do that we have some control over as
Yeah, right,
well.
and it is a
So-
controlled
So
trauma.
we don't go too far out there to scare ourselves and really bring a rap about the trauma, but it's sort of regulated in some way. So I can understand it now. Well, that's helpful. But you're right. The movie, the horror genre is everywhere. There's always a horror movie on. Almost always a horror movie on.
And another way to think about this from a neuroscientific perspective, there is Panksepp, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. He talks about that the brain is actually organized along, there's 7 organizing principles of the brain. So they're like 7 systems. And one of those, I think there's procreation, there's aggression, there's seeking, there's attachment, there's sleepy, there's there's
I knew that was coming. All right.
there
go ahead.
are
Keep going.
What there's I'll have to think about the others, but
Okay.
But
That's
one of the
all right.
ones that are important is this the seeking system. Like, and they use the example of a dog. Like this morning, my wife and I got up and we walked the dog.
Okay.
And apparently you're supposed to use a leash, and if it bites somebody, you're supposed to have you have legal recourse. I didn't know that. I just ran.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
So we walked the dog. Dogs are a wonderful example of the seeking system. Just like, wagging tails,
Right,
smelling
right,
stuff.
right.
Ate a diaper. Somebody threw a diaper out. The dog ate it. I don't know. These things
Yes,
happen.
I think I get the point.
But the dog
yes.
that does the seeking thing.
It did not eat a diaper, but go ahead. All right.
He did smell a diaper. My wife got
Okay,
upset.
all right, there we
But it was a really big baby's diaper. Like, I'm thinking that baby had to at least be 200 pounds. So I'm not really sure what was going on there. And there was a pacifier the size of like
a giant pacifier,
Yeah, it
like
was
an adult pacifier.
Yeah, I'm like,
Is that where we're going?
what was that? What was that
Okay.
about? But
I'm definitely not ready, but I'd like to get to the end of this example at some point. Yeah.
Dog seeking. And we have the same thing. And so part of it is that, that we often have to seek out, like, boredom is something we all have to find a way to escape. We have to create a life in which there are not just bright and shiny things, but there are things that are loud. There are things that move quickly, and the art serves that purpose too. And you can think of a horror film. It's got some bright and shiny, but it's also got some booms and some things that move quickly, and so that
alarms us just enough,
But
not
see,
full scale.
in these moments, all that sounds cool, but I think we should also go down the rabbit hole of Melanie Klein.
Okay, you're going to talk object relations.
Object
with us now,
relations,
right
and
now.
Melanie
Okay, get
Klein.
ready for that.
So this is one of the things about Melanie. And Melanie Klein, if you go back and read some Melanie Klein, some of that stuff is just really way out there, like that. But one of the things she brings up is the first art object is Mom.
Okay.
And Mom is both the first Old Yeller, the first romantic comedy, but also the first horror movie we see.
Okay.
And so incorporated in
All right,
that is the notion that, and Klein talks about how there are things inside Mom that we'd like to have. We don't know what they are. There are ways in which she comes and goes. There is a capricious element to her connection to us. Her interests move elsewhere. And so there are feelings of shame and anger and degradation. And there's this cat by the name of Julia Kristeva, who sort of takes from Melanie Klein, and she talks about the notion of the abject. And she says that part of what Mom does for us and society in general, to define who we are, we have to not own or disown parts of ourselves. And so there are elements of us if you've ever thought about the human body, it's pretty gross. There's lots of horrible, disgusting things going on at all times.
Yes.
There are.
Okay.
And we have to quickly, to define ourselves in a positive sense, we quickly label parts of ourselves that we need to disown to have, so there has to be a negative to be a positive. And so there are tremendous elements of us that are considered the abject, right? Mm-hmm. And a wonderful example of the abject, and Zizek talks about this, is, I may have mentioned before too, but think about it.
Okay.
Think about the amount of saliva you swallow every day.
Can I not think about that? Because my guess is it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
So if you just take a small bit of that, just a glass full, and over 5 or 10 minutes, just spit it into a cup.
Right.
And then try to swallow it.
No. No,
it's not
that
good,
would not
right?
be. But I know we're okay. Keep going though.
So
I got the
and
idea,
even the
the
thought of that
grossness of it all
generates nausea. So there's this in horror. There's a return of the parts we've disowned. When you think about horror movies, often have people getting cut up, gore, vomit, all the very things that
lots of blood.
Blood. I mean, even if you've ever watched Silence of the Lambs, there's a point where ejaculate gets thrown at Agent Starling. So you can't think of a single emission or a bodily emission that we don't have some sort of ambivalence or conflict with that doesn't find its way into a horror film.
Okay.
And so, according to Kristeva, we need the occasional rendezvous with disowned parts of ourselves to generate some sort of homeostasis. So it's like we watch horror films in some ways to become reacquainted, at least temporarily, with parts of ourselves that we know but we don't own. Right?
Right.
And there's a whole genre, and it's really taken off, of the body horror, where, Alien is a wonderful example of early body horror.
Right, right.
I don't know if you've seen that movie, that Alien movie.
I think
where
I
the
have.
thing goes
bursting out of the person,
thing,
yes, and running across the room.
That's a wonderful example, and Christopher even talks about that. That this is an example of the abject, something inside of us, and she draws a connection between all sorts of things, even sexuality. There's a way in which we are sexuality owns us. In teenagers, suddenly hair starts popping up everywhere. You suddenly start having all these weird urges, and all these sort of things start to happen. That's a little like the alien that popped out of that guy's chest. Mm-hmm. There are parts of us that just go boom, right?
Right.
And Christopher talks about
lifelong too. It continues as you get into later age. I understand.
And when you start getting older, and then the body horror is real, right?
Yes, unfortunately, as we get a little older, yes,
right,
there are a lot of those things coming back.
Yeah, you got like things start to sag.
Hair starts to grow in different places.
It does. Yeah, it's like you wake up and you've got like these things happen. Another film that sort of that really connects with this notion of the abject. Ever see that movie? Not the original black and white one, but the John Carpenter The Thing movie.
Yes, of course.
And remember, it's like all about bodies that turn themselves inside out. There's even a scene where they're doing the coding. What do you call it, with the defibrillator thing?
Right.
And suddenly the guy's chest. He goes into the guy's chest, and the guy's chest grows teeth, and then bites off his hands.
Yes.
Remember that scene?
Spoiler alert, I guess, for some of
that happens.
That
and then the guy stands up, and he's got blood squirting out of these stumps.
Right.
So in that single
nice
moment,
special effects, but
it was.
That's the only way I can get through it, is consider it to not be real.
But notice, so you have to generate enough distance. So you move. Your ego quickly does its thing and draws a line in the sand.
Right.
But even in the act of doing that, there's something that could be considered healthy, that you are exercising your ego and your capacity for drawing a line in the sand and generating a boundary between you and the rest of the planet. And that movie allows you a chance to do that. Mm-hmm. It allows you a chance to play with those sorts of moments. And embedded in both Aliens and The Thing are a relationship with our body that we're not completely conscious of.
Right. And it's operating, and then so when we watch these horror movies, that we're reaching that upper limit of the dysthymic window you're talking about, and it's okay for us because it helps us regulate the real horrors that are out there that we face at times.
And the more you can expand your euthymic window, if we think back to Freud, that we define mental health as the capacity to love, work, and play. Well, those who have a very narrow euthymic window, and I don't know any studies in this, but folks who are really, really, really upset by horror movies, we may find that may be a constricted euthymic window due to developmental trauma, for instance. Right? It's suddenly
restricted by the life experience or the trauma that a person has already experienced early on in their life.
And one of the key elements of effective therapy in many ways is it's either in vivo or guided exposure. So, what happens when someone comes into a therapy session is they slowly but surely begin to put into words the alien that's trying to pop out of their chest. And so it doesn't have to pop out of their chest. They can simply say, some days it feels like there's something going to come out of me that I have no control over. Right. Boom. And that euthymic window expands. Their capacity for self-regulation, their capacity for the modulation of their inner states.
Right. Okay.
And so you can think about,
it's almost like growth in that area. The more you're exposed, it's okay, and you can kind of manage it and regulate it, then you can take on more of that as you need. If you don't expand that, you're going to be frightened and scared and probably have difficulties with lots of things in the world.
Yeah, in some ways, as opposed to a spectator of a horror film, you may find yourself in the middle of it, even after you leave the theater. And, there's lots of talk in this notion of locus of control.
Right.
And individuals who have externalized their locus of control, they're often in a horror movie. There are all these ways in which we are, that when people enter therapy, what often happens is they begin to modulate the things they feel. They begin to experience an extended locus of control. That euthymic window broadens. These are all things that can happen that you can work towards, right?
But yeah, and I was thinking, we mentioned the family members and somebody who would never see these horror movies. They're restricting themselves in a certain way because of that. But also, on a conscious level, it's like, I don't want to be exposed to that. It's too real. In other words, they sort of label it as this movie. And I've said that to my wife on a number of occasions. These actors are getting paid a lot of money to have their hands cut off or whatever that might be.
Well, what do you think about
special
this,
effects, it's not real. And I'm not sure that everybody, I think people are kind of like at the surface level of thinking that it hits them in that way, even though they know
why do you think
different.
that would be then? So because, for instance, in your case, you can navigate these sort of stage traumas in a horror film by saying, well, this is good special effects. You can allow yourself a capacity to be both participant and observer in the film, and you can generate enough observer self-reflective status to be able to say, okay, right now, let me remind myself this is just, and the special effects are great. Some people can't.
Getting better.
What now?
They're getting better.
They're getting better,
I
yeah.
mean, it looks.
right.
It would convince some people that it's real.
Come
out of
a
context,
long way
a
since
little
Plan
bit,
9
yeah.
from Outer Space. But but others don't seem to have that capacity. Well, what do you think about that? Why would?
I don't know. I'm almost thinking that it's some defense mechanism where we are resistant to exposing ourselves to it. That at some level we're telling ourselves we can't quite manage that, or we don't want to manage it, and therefore it's a protective mechanism that we kind of keep ourselves away from that because what it might turn up in us, and maybe we're a little afraid of that. But yeah, I think you're right about the exposure of it. The more you're kind of exposed and you see it, the greater capacity you have to manage it.
Well, I wonder where that capacity, and there probably is some research on this in terms of is there a certain character structure that respond to horror movies a certain way? Maybe even attachment styles. Are there? Is there something about the ways in which we organize our inner selves or the maps we have for the world that may tell us something about how we're able to watch or not watch a horror movie? Right. Like I wonder.
I mean, just on a simple level, it's this is going to connect with some trauma that a person has, and they are trying it by all means to avoid going back and looking at that. When we know in therapy that's exactly where we need to go to sort of work through that issue, whatever that trauma might be, and come out on the other side.
That idea
of
of the edge, that growth edge.
Yes.
To be able to come to a place where someone is just at a spot where they're experiencing just enough anxiety, and to help them to be able to regulate that, to modulate it, or to modulate it, hopefully, and to be able to get them through modulation, to be able to move a little further through it.
Right.
I don't think too many people. I've had people come into therapy and say, they're afraid of flying, or they have some specific phobias. I haven't had anyone come in and say they have a fear of. They want to be able to overcome their horror movie fear, but
Well, it might be diagnostic to just ask them about horror movies. How many horror movies have you seen? I never go to horror movies or whatever.
That would be
respond
part
to
of
that. It might be kind of fun as a research project, perhaps.
But what about you could have the opposite problem? Like, what about someone who is drawn to horror movies? Individuals who are within the psychopathic realm. They often have to chase louder and more intense experiences because that's what they need to feel some sense of life.
Right.
There are individuals whose relationship to the abject may be such that, as opposed to some sort of healthy disownership, they are somehow immersed in it. That the serial killer that may want to find themselves awash in their victim's viscera, right? This is the opposite of the sort of disowning and dance with the abject that we might expect in a, quote, healthy person. Right. So we could say that, maybe there's a connection between too much consumption or that of horror movies that may say something too.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a good point. It may be almost like a tolerance level that you have to get another fix from the substance abuse literature, that the tolerance level is sort of continues to bump up and you have to have more and more to satiate that kind of thing. Well, that's interesting. So my question back to you about this, and I appreciate all that was very insightful discussion, but I'm guessing that you have a hard time enjoying this horror movie that you're going to see because you're running it through that psychoanalytic filter and you're watching out for these kind of things that we just talked about. And I'm a little concerned that, wait, what about the entertainment value for you? Can you just say, wow?
Well, here's the thing, because this is why I think that there is you want to be able to balance the participant observer element. So, and what that means is you are both present, but also have the capacity for self-reflection and experiences. And your capacity for flexibility with that is important. If like we mentioned the Tarantino last week,
sure.
It's usually only afterwards that I began to think about it. If it's a really good film, it creates a holding space where I become
draws you in.
right.
Yeah.
And so one of the benefits of that film, we talked about it last time, is you felt sort of sad